All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm David Brumbaugh, but I'm commonly called Caver Dave. As Matthew said, I'm now at Yosemite National Park, and I love Yosemite, but I'm struggling with not being underground. This is actually my first job that was not cave focused. Matthew did a little rundown of some of the places that I've worked at, and basically my entire life has been dedicated to the underground. So this is one way I can still dedicate my life to the underground, is doing outreach programs. This specific outreach is through the National Speleological Society Speleo Guest Program is the name of one of our educational outreach programs. So obviously that's a play on words for speleologist. So speleon is the Greek word for cave. So that's why when people go caving, they say that they are spelunking. A caver typically wouldn't call themselves a spelunker. Some do. You'll commonly hear that word, but the word spelunker has just become so popularized that many cavers tend to sort of try to disconnect themselves from it, because anyone with a plastic flashlight who tries to take a couple drinks down into a hole in the ground and party calls themselves a spelunker. So spelunkers often get chased off properties by landowners, and sometimes it's stereotyped with people that are going to be spray painting caves and whatnot. So I still like the word spelunker, but a lot of times cavers just call themselves cavers. But yeah, a cave scientist is a speleologist. And so that's why the nonprofit that I am with, I'm a director on the board of governors for the National Speleological Society. So the NSS, caves.org is the website for the NSS, and we're just dedicated to caves, exploring them, studying them, protecting them, and educating people about caves. They're a really important feature amongst our world, and we're going to talk about some of their features today. But right there on my cover shot, if you can see that glowing formation, that's just a shot that my wife captured that moment where a water droplet hit a stalagmite and splashed. So that critical timing. This particular stalagmite, it only drips once every 5 minutes, and it's pretty consistent. In fact, many stalactites are very consistent with their drip. Obviously, drip rates are going to fluctuate with rainfall, but you can time them down to there's some formations that will only drip once a month. And one time I got to witness a column be formed. A stalactite was barely touching a stalagmite. It wasn't touching yet. And for years, I would point that formation out, that you could slide a piece of paper through it if you wanted to. But I was guiding a tour in Canada once, and it was a full day long cave tour. And going in, you could see the gap in the water droplet there with the mineral inside of it. But then on the way out at the end of the day, that crystallization had actually taken place. So geology's obviously taken place right in front of our eyes. So yeah, there's the website for the NSS, caves.org. And if you go to caves.org, you're going to see that picture there as the main picture. That's not one of my pictures. It's not one of my wife's pictures. That's an NSS picture, but that is a picture from my last park that I worked at. That specific picture, some of you may recognize it because it's in the Chandelier Ballroom. If many of you or any of you are familiar with Planet Earth, the Planet Earth nature series of documentaries, episode 4 of Planet Earth is all about caves. And the grand finale of that episode is this particular cave. It's called Lechagia Cave.
That's why it looks familiar.
Yeah.
David Attenborough's a national treasure, by the way. I just had to say that. I hope he lives forever.
Yeah, this is sort of the trophy room of Lechagia Cave. So it's been I hate to say that though, because there's so many trophy rooms in that cave. But amongst the general public, this is the picture. This is the room that people think of when they think of Lech. Lechugia Cave is the name of the cave, but many cavers just call it Lech. And it's a research only cave that's in Carlsbad Caverns National Park. And part of the reason it's research only is because of what you're seeing right there, gypsum crystal chandeliers. If you graze those things with your shirt sleeve, you are going to damage them. Gypsum is a very delicate crystal, and especially when it forms those crystal chandeliers, if you bump into those things, they are toast. So they only let the most experienced cavers conduct work in Lechugia Cave, but it's also a very, very demanding cave. There's over 5 miles of rope work involved in getting through that cave. So that, rope work, single rope technique, SRT, rappelling down pits to get into chambers. And some of the pits will be 180-foot drops that you rappel down in. And everything that you rappel down, of course, you're going to have to climb back up using ascenders to climb your way back up. But this is the cave that I started my caving career at. This is the one that Matthew mentioned in central Pennsylvania. So this one wouldn't be too far from you folks. You're in Baltimore, correct? Most of you. And so this cave is right around State College, Pennsylvania. So that's probably 3 or 4 hours north of you. You've probably heard of Penn State University. Well, very, very close to Penn State is Penn's Cave. And it's an all-water cave. It's kind of like a river cave. Technically, it's a creek that pumps through it. And the name of the creek is Penn's Creek. That's actually how the cave got its name, because it's the headwaters of that creek. And Penn's Creek is one of the best trout fishing creeks in America. And most top trout fishing creeks come from caves or out of karst topography, cave area, cave bedrock. And the reasoning for that is because limestone is a natural filter. So usually cave water, cave streams is going to be clean and pristine. And you're probably looking at that picture and being like, Dave, that does not look clean and pristine. And that's because just based on the color of the water, this was during a flooding season. And I can actually tell just by the level of the boat where it's sitting on the dock. Usually you have to kind of step down onto the boat. So after heavy rainfall, there's a 10 square mile funnel. All the mountains and the valleys in that area all drain down to that one central location. And there's actually a series of caves that are higher in that area that all connect to that one main cave in the center of the valley. And so when it rains excessively, obviously the cave floods, and it can turn into whitewater rapids through that cave. That's obviously when they are closed. They are not doing cave tours when it's that strong. But in 1972, Hurricane Agnes got up to the 12th step of that staircase. And I'm not sure if my dad's on. He said he might try to log on to this meeting. And he still works there. Dad started there in 1980, and he still drives those boats to this very day. So I grew up on the back of those cave boats. And Dad took us caving all the time. There's me when I was an adolescent, scrambling around through some fun, muddy Pennsylvania caves. Matt mentioned this in my family. You can see a couple shots of some of us. There's my dad in the red sweatshirt. We were actually caving in Canada for that shot. You can see my baby there with some of the gear, and my wife there. So yeah, caving's in my blood, and I try to get as many folks interested in it as possible. That one with the manhole, that's a cave in New Mexico that's actually managed by the Bureau of Land Management. And what it's famous for, in my opinion, is not really a great thing, but it's neat. Back in the 60s, they allowed an artist and a filming crew to paint the walls of that cave to make it look like some of the famous caves in France with the pictographs that are over 15,000 years old, like Lascaux Cave. And so there's a cave in New Mexico that's sort of a replica of those French caves with some of the best preserved ancient human artwork and caves in the world. There's a phenomenal documentary on those caves called The Cave of Forgotten Dreams. I encourage you to check out that documentary. It features Lascaux and Chavez Cave. And they were actually going to film a documentary about those caves, but there was a California TV crew that couldn't get permits to those French caves. So that's why back in the 60s, they actually painted this particular cave called Lost Cave to sort of match that. And they filmed the documentary, but then flying back to California, their plane crashed and all the footage was gone. Obviously, cave painting is heavily frowned upon nowadays. But when you talk about caves, usually people are thinking of limestone caves. Marble caves are quite similar to limestone caves, but there's many different types of caves. You know, the definition of a cave is a natural cavity in the ground that can permit human entrance. And there's conflicting definitions. I've heard one definition say that it has to meet a point of total darkness and a human can reach that point of total darkness. But there are lots of rock shelters and whatnot that are called caves. And pseudokarst are areas that are not limestone, not marble, like where they have lava tubes where it features, it parallels what you would sort of see in a cave environment. But there's many different types of caves out there, of course. You got your ice caves, your sea caves, your talus caves. Those are just like your when boulders come together and you can squeeze through them. Here in Yosemite, there's a popular talus cave that goes back a couple hundred feet. And you've got some pseudokarst caves in Maryland as well. There's one that goes at least 100 yards back. It's called Rocky Gap Cave, and it's not the easiest one to traverse, so I don't recommend just heading out to Rocky Gap Cave. But I can send you pictures of it later if you want. It's got a neat entrance that you crawl down through. But yeah, the most famous caves are in karst topography, and 20% of the Earth's surface is karst. So wherever you are, karst isn't too far away. And limestone and marble, whenever the water's going through them, it can clean the water, which is why I don't think I ever finished my sentence earlier about the trout creeks. Trout need cold, clean water to survive in. And so that's why all the best trout fishing creeks tend to come out of karst topography, because karst accounts for almost 25% of Earth's drinking water comes from karst landscapes. So when caves get polluted, our drinking waters get polluted, and that messes up ecosystems big time. You know, sinkholes are a common feature of karst landscapes, and a lot of areas that have had people living in for a long time have used sinkholes as dumps or trash or garbage disposal. And then they start wondering why their drinking water is tasting a little funny. And that's because it's heading right down into the caves and then heading straight to the water table. So grottos, caving clubs will do cleanup trips of karst topographies. A lot of focus on cleaning up sinkholes. So yeah, disappearing streams, sinkholes, limestone, marble, dolomite is another karst bedrock. You know, when you're talking about karst bedrock, you're talking about water-soluble bedrock. So bedrock that can be dissolved, and that's where you're going to find your cavities in the earth, which is your caves. And the sinkholes are usually the entrances to the caves. You know, sinkholes typically form when the ceiling of the cave gets too close to the surface of the earth and there's not enough support and it collapses down in. So a lot of times when people are in a cave and they hear that they're like 200, 300 feet underground, that sometimes scares people. but it should be the opposite, because the deeper the cave, the safer the cave. The more bedrock above you, the more support above you, the more solid it is. And you're going to find your most fragile features typically in your really deep caves, because those are also the ones that are way less susceptible to earthquake damage. You know, when there's an earthquake and the ground moves, the cave just kind of moves right along with it. So I've been in caves during earthquakes that I didn't even know that they took place. You'll hear all different kinds of stories of caves and earthquakes, and they all tend to line up with the deeper the cave below the ground, the better off you are. If you can see roots coming through the ceiling from plants that are above the cave, that's a good sign that that part of the cave is nearing the end of its life cycle, if you will, and that a sinkhole is probably going to form before too long. So that's how a lot of caves are discovered, literally just by digging in sinkholes. Cavers will go to cave sinkholes and just start digging and following the disappearing water that pumps down through those sinkholes. And sometimes it's years upon years upon years of digging, usually on their days off as a hobby. I've spent a lot of my life digging in sinkholes to try to discover caves, and some of them have failed and some of them have not failed and gone on. But that's usually your epigenic caves. So epigenic meaning from above. Epi from above, and genic from the word genesis. So that's why the title of this slide here says speleogenesis. That's the beginning of a cave and how caves form. So most caves, when people think of them, they're thinking of solution caves that were formed by erosion and dissolution of the rock. And you'll get subterranean streams coming down, and you'll get cavities under the rock, and the slight acidity of the water from carbon dioxide in the water giving you a weak carbonic acid, just weak enough to slowly and gradually dissolve the rock. But that's not the way all caves are formed. Some caves are formed hypogenically by a solution that rose up, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But if the mountains are more vertical, then oftentimes the caves are more vertical. And I actually moved to Vancouver Island, my wife and I, back in 2010, we moved to Vancouver Island to become vertically proficient cavers, because, you know, we grew up in the Appalachian Mountains, which are kind of more horizontal mountains and therefore more horizontal caves. But the mountains on Vancouver Island are really young mountains and very steep and vertical mountains. So the caves tend to be more young and steep and vertical. In fact, the caves on Vancouver Island, which there's like 1,600 caves on Vancouver Island, it's a pretty big island. It's an island about the size of the state of Pennsylvania. And if you go over to the mainland, to Vancouver, you don't really find a whole lot of caves. And that's because it's a completely separate tectonic plate. Vancouver Island is called the Juan de Fuca plate, and it used to be part of Southern California. There was a shallow inland sea in Southern California, and the Juan de Fuca plate was a plate that broke off from Southern California and then forced its way up between the Pacific plate and the North American plate, and then it got wedged upward to form those big mountains of Vancouver Island. And then during the Ice Age, the melting waters of the Ice Age dissolved out those caves.
In that room that I stayed in.
I unmuted it.
Oh, that's my dad. My dad's talking.
Sorry.
Hey, Dad, feel free to chime in if you want to say anything.
Hi, Dave's dad.
Hello. I sent a chat message that sometimes people see steam rising out of sinkholes in the winter, and that's how they find cave entrances.
Yeah, that ties in with what we were talking about earlier, the bedrock. You know, the thicker the bedrock, not only the more support, but the more insulation. So when people think of caves, they usually think of a constant temperature of 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That's what a lot of people just think is routine across the board. but it's actually based on the climate of the area. So it's the average annual climate of the area is what the caves are going to hold, or what the bedrock's going to hold. So, take your summer temp and take your winter temp and find your average, and that's what the caves in those areas are going to be. So the caves where Dad works, those are 52-degree Fahrenheit caves all year round. So in the wintertime, when it's -5 degrees, those cave entrances are like steam pots just rising up. Often on cold days when I'd be going into Penn's cave to guide tours in the winter, sometimes from a half-mile out, I could see the steam rising up out of the main entrance of that cave. More the dry entrance, that one steams really well. But these Vancouver Island caves on this slide, those are 40-degree Fahrenheit caves all year round. And then the Texas caves I worked at, which I'll show some of those in a bit, are like 75 degrees Fahrenheit all year round with nearly 100% humidity. So those caves, they feel like a sauna as you're going into them. But with any cave, you have to be prepared for vertical shafts. So if you're interested in getting into caving, there are horizontal caves, but a lot of times on a horizontal cave, there's going to be a drop here or there. So it's really good to be proficient with ropes. And the National Speleological Society has a section of the NSS that's just dedicated to vertical training. So there are resources available for people to learn this. And even if you don't want to be a vertical caver and just want to try it out, there are ropes instructors that love to teach people and just put a rope in their tree in their backyard. Because some of these caves have huge drops. Sometimes it's just tiny little drops, but you can see the rope that I have around my shoulders there. That was on my way to Deep Cave, and the picture in the middle is not Deep Cave. I believe that's a tag cave. Tag being Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia. Between Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia, there's over 20,000 caves for people to explore, and a lot of them have big drops. Georgia has Ellison's Cave, which is famous for the deepest vertical pits in the United States. There's a pit called Fantastic Pit in Ellison's Cave, which is about a 500-foot vertical drop that you rappel down into it. And then farther into that cave, there's a Incredible Pit, which is about a 400-foot vertical drop rappelling into it. And I know cavers will watch this later and correct me on the exact measurement of those drops. But there's the cave that I was heading out to on this particular day where I'm holding that big bundle of rope. That's Deep Cave, and that's in Carlsbad Caverns National Park. And it has about a 4, if you count the slope rappel leading down to it and then the vertical part, combined, it's about a 400-foot drop that you rappel in. And the last 100 feet or so is free hanging rope down into that cave. And it's a neat one because it's got the tallest column of any cave in America. It's got I'm thinking of Ogle Cave, which is another one in that park, but it's got huge formations, like 70-foot tall cave formations in it. And that was part of what drew me to go to work at Carlsbad Caverns, is just the magnitude of those caves. If you just go to Carlsbad Cavern and just do the basic tour, you take the elevator down to the big room, and there's handicap accessible trails that go around the big room. The big room in Carlsbad Caverns is 8.2 acres in volume. So you could fit about 7 football fields inside that one cave room. And it's got a ceiling that's 255 feet tall in the center of it. So that's like the main room within Carlsbad Cavern. But that park, that single cave is over 40 miles long. The public sees about 2 miles of that cave. So there's another 38 miles to that cave. But that park has 130 plus other caves, not even separated, not even connected to Carlsbad Caverns. And one of them is Lechagia Cave, which we talked about briefly earlier. Lech recently hit over 150 miles long, and there's no end in sight. So that's a really important cave for research. because of other things we'll talk about later. But Mammoth Cave I threw up here because that cave's over 420 miles long. So Mammoth Cave is, at the moment, by far the longest cave in the world. It's almost, not exactly, but almost twice as long as the second longest cave in the world.
Dave, can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
When you say, so you said Let's recently hit 150 miles, does that mean that they've just explored that much, or that the cave is actually expanding?
Oh,
What
no,
do you mean by that?
we found more.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And that cave is actually, it's not getting any longer. In fact, technically it's getting smaller because cave formations are starting to fill in the voids as the stalagmites are growing and whatnot. But there's no more tunnels being formed in that cave because those caves were formed hypogenically from sulfuric acid that rose up from beneath. So that's why Carlsbad Caverns has such huge chambers to it, because it wasn't formed by erosional water coming down. It was formed by sulfuric acid that had bubbled up from beneath. It's believed that the sulfuric acid came from, there's a lot of petroleum in that area. In fact, that basin down below the cave park is one of the largest oil basins in the world, really. It's one of the largest oil basins in the world, the Permian Basin. And the theory is that microbes eat the petroleum, and then the byproduct of that, they consuming the petroleum, the byproduct is H2S that rises up through the cracks in the earth and then combined with oxygen at the water table to make sulfuric acid. There's other theories on how those caves formed, but that is one of the theories on how the Guadalupe Mountain caves in New Mexico formed. But from sulfuric acid rising up from beneath, eating away at the rock. And then as the mountains were formed, the sulfuric acid dissipating, the cracks filled in, and the sulfuric acid is not getting into those caves anymore. But that's why they're so big, because sulfuric acid is essentially battery acid. It's the same pH scale as battery acid. And that was pretty recent that they realized that. They didn't start looking into that until like the 70s, and they didn't get the scientific community on board until the 80s, that those caves were formed in that process, hypogenically. And by hypogenic sulfuric acid speleogenesis is the wordage for how those caves formed. Now, Mammoth Cave was formed epigenically by water coming downward, but the reason it's so long, one contributing reason, besides there's many joint cracks that intersect, but also the limestone that it's in is capped with a thick sandstone that's more resistant to the water. So that kind of holds the water underground. That's also why some portions of Mammoth Cave aren't as decorated, you might say, as Carlsbad Caverns. That's a really pure limestone that doesn't have a capstone above it, doesn't have like sandstone above the limestone. So limestone is the type of bedrock that's going to give you your best cave decorations, which we'll get into more later. But yeah, with Mammoth Cave being over 400 miles long, easily the longest cave in the world. But out of the top 10 longest caves in the world, 5 of them are in the continental US. But I moved to the south with my wife. That's my wife right there, Melissa Horne. We moved to Texas to work at the Caverns of Sonora because it too is a hypogenic cave, similar to Carlsbad Caverns. And that was a new concept to us. I'd never been in a hypogenic cave prior to going to Caverns of Sonora, and I couldn't have really explained it at the time. So we moved there to work there. And these are some of the most decorated caves in the world as well, because they don't have, once the sulfuric acid dissipated out of those caves, there's no erosional or there's no corrosional features going on. There's no erosional features, like, because there's no streams, there's no creeks, there's no rivers pumping through these hypogenic caves. So there are just these cavities within the bedrock that can then be filled with crystal formations. So a lot of these caves, like Caverns of Sonora that you can see there, or the Guadalupe caves, they'll be crystal formations sealing walls and floor. And that's what you're seeing in this shot. We're on one tiny little trail that was set aside to protect that cave. That is a privately owned operation. Sonora is. And the goal of it's a family business, and the goal of that family was actually to protect that cave. They said conservation through commercialization, because then they could keep an eye on it, but only have certain areas of it set aside for visitation. I believe there's 7 miles mapped to that cave so far, and the public has access to almost 2 miles of it. But the family is not allowing any more exploration because it's too fragile of a cave. Every time exploration takes place in that cave, stuff gets damaged. But a lot of these privately owned caves are in cooperation with the National Caves Association. A lot of the major caves across America are going to be NCA caves, National Cave Association. And there's caves all across the United States. Everywhere you go, you can find an NCA cave. So those are going to be your caves. They're going to be show caves that you can, go to a gift shop, buy a ticket to go down into the cave. But wherever there's a show cave, there's going to be many, many wild caves that are not developed for the public. These are some of the rare formations that are in Sonora. There's some gypsum growing on that formation. Got some cave clubs there. Those ones that, well, they look like clubs. They're called cave clubs. They form in an interesting manner. It's actually convection cells of air. When the air is warmed and moist, it goes to the ceiling, and then the moisture of the air can actually dissolve the stalactite at the base and bring the minerals down, and then it hits the drier, colder air. We're talking minuscule difference in temperature, but it's slightly drier, so it causes evaporation of the mineral-rich water. So cave clubs are stalactites that are actually growing skinnier at the base and wider at the tip. And there's one cave club in Sonora that at the base now it's only as thick as your wrist, but down at the tip it's like as big as a beach ball around. So you have some really unique formations, and you can see some fishtail halectites in that one photo there. Halectites are formations that defy gravity. Most people know stalactites and stalagmites, but halectites grow sideways out of the wall. I think I have a slide about those later. But the Guadalupe Mountains are a fossilized reef. And so wherever you get limestone, it's usually because there was a shallow inland sea there. And so you always find fossils of sea creatures within limestone. And then based on the types of fossils, you can use that as a sort of a guess of the age of the limestone. If you're just out in the field, there are ways to date the bedrock besides just looking at the fossils that are in it, such as uranium dating and other radionuclide dating techniques. But the Guadalupe Mountains is one of the best Permian reef fossil formations in the world. So really pure limestone with amazing fossils, and therefore really water soluble rock, giving you these big, gigantic, beautiful caves. There's just a shot of the big room and Lechuguilla. But where you get these big, beautiful caves, you also get sometimes big, beautiful bat colonies. The entrance of Carlsbad Caverns there is a perfect funnel shape for Brazilian free-tailed bats to sink down in. Well, actually, whenever they go into a cave, this species of bat, they dive bomb down in, flying up to speeds of like 100 miles per hour as they're diving into them. It's actually the fastest animal in the world for horizontal movement. Is the Brazilian free-tailed bat. According to Dr. McCracken, who's a Tennessee chiropterologist. Chiroptera is the Greek word for hand wing, and that's all bats are under the order of Chiroptera. So a bat biologist is called a chiropterologist. So Dr. McCracken, famous chiropterologist, he claims to have clocked a Brazilian free-tailed bat, commonly called a Mexican free-tailed bat, at 100 miles per hour in horizontal movement, which is kind of controversial. A lot of people say, well, that sounds way too fast, but he's a well-respected chiropterologist, and I believe it, but they've routinely been clocked around 60, 70 miles per hour, this species of bat. there's over 1,400 species of bats. That's 25% of all mammals. 24% of all mammals are bats. The only order that's larger than the Chiroptera is the rodent order, and more than 25% of all mammals are rodents. And of course, rodents and bats are completely different. Bats are not rodents. But yeah, that's crazy to think about, that over 50% of all mammals are either rodents or bats. But Carlsbad Caverns gets about in a 500,000 bats. That number can fluctuate drastically. There was one year that they did estimate almost 1 million bats in the bat cave. And there's been other years that it's been estimated at like 50,000 bats. A lot of it depends on how much rain is occurring. So that's a good colony. It's a very good colony, but there's caves in Texas that get multi-millions. Bracken Cave in Texas gets 20 million bats. That's the largest colony of bats in the world. And it's also the largest colony of mammals anywhere in the world, in that one cave in San Antonio, Texas.
Got
And
a
I like to
question,
think
Dave,
of
about bats in the chat has come in. What's the latest on white nose syndrome? Did it hit the bats in Southwest?
It has been found in the Southwest. Just last year, there were 2 caves not far from Carlsbad, they were the county over, where white nose did come up positive. However, white nose syndrome kills hibernating species because it disturbs their hibernation in the winter. And in the desert, the winters aren't as bad. You know, there's definitely cold bouts. Right now, Carlsbad Caverns has 2 feet of snow, but that could be gone in a week or two. But up in like Vermont, New York, Pennsylvania, you know, winter can be extreme the entire winter. So if bats are disturbed in the winter in those states, it's way more devastating. It's not to say it's not going to be devastating, but it will impact their hibernation in the South. And white nose has recently popped up on the West Coast too, now in Washington State, an occurrence, and in California. But the areas that get the worst winters are where the bats are going to be impacted the most. But these colonies that you're looking at in these pictures, they don't hibernate, they migrate. As soon as it gets cold out, those bats fly south for the winter. And that's where they winter in caves in Mexico, and then they mate, and then they return to the caves slightly farther north to have their babies in the spring in those caves. So these are actually maternity colonies where mother bats go to have their babies. And so since they don't hibernate, these migratory bats, I dare say that they don't need to worry about white nose syndrome. But there are 16 species of bats in that area of New Mexico, and some of them are hibernating species. So that is of concern, but it's not, so far we're not seeing deaths from it. But yeah, that's Merlin. He's a famous chiropterologist, and he started Bat Conservation International. So bci.org is their website. However, Merlin now has a different bat conservancy that he runs called the Merlin Tuttle Bat Conservancy. So I encourage you to look up BCI and the Merlin Tuttle Bat Conservancy. And, you know, they'll do bat tours where they take you to some of these colonies that have millions of them and talk about them and witness them. And they fly out of the caves in a tornado pattern because they can't fly straight up, because the Brazilian free-tailed bat is built for distance and speed since they migrate and they're fast. No bat can fly perfectly straight up. The ones that are more maneuverable tend to be the slower bats. They have broader wings. So yeah, many different flight patterns based on bats, but with the Brazilian freetails, they do that tornado pattern as they're coming out of the cave. It's just magical to see. But there's different categories of cave life. I think on the last slide, I put the word biospeleology there. So we talked about how a cave scientist is a speleologist, and obviously a biologist studies life. So someone who studies life in caves is called a biospeleologist. And when you're studying life in caves, there's different categories based on essentially how much time they spend in the cave. A cave visitor is a troglodyne. So, bats have to leave caves in order to go find food. Usually they also go to find water, go into lakes and rivers and things like that too. So anything that can't stay its whole life in a cave and has to leave it, it's called a troglazine. I believe that's one of your photos, Dad, of the beaver in the upper corner. That's a beaver that's in the cave that my dad manages in PA. Those are some cave swallows that live in the entrance of Carlsbad Caverns that we're studying, the other two pictures that you see there. So troglazines, cave visitors, and yeah, bats are a great example of them. According to some mammalogists, bats are actually the most important mammal on the face of the earth. Without bats, ecosystems would just collapse. They're the #1 insect controller on the planet. One bat can easily eat over 1,000 bugs a night. And, Bracken Cave gets 20 million bats. So if you do the math, it's over 200,000 pounds of bugs that one colony eats every single night. And, even if a cave only has like 50 bats, one of them eating 1,000 bugs a night, 50,000 bugs a night in your local cave that are going to be eaten up.
There's another question, Dave.
Yeah, go ahead.
So researchers go to bat caves to discover new viruses. Have you ever known any cavers to catch any diseases?
Histoplasmosis. When people think of bats, they think of rabies. So yeah, you can get lung disorders, especially if you're in a cave like this one. It's perfect timing with this picture, because as you can see, George there is wearing a respirator, because that cave, the guano is 100 feet tall. That's in Bracken Cave. So it's a 100-foot tall pile of bat guano. And so obviously,
that sounds like a lot of guano to me.
That's a lot of guano.
Sorry, Dave, I couldn't resist.
So if you're in a bat cave like that, you want to wear a respirator if it's going to be a huge guano pile, and you want to be fit tested for the respirator and shave your beard off, of course. But those caves can actually get domestic beetles that eat the guano and then produce ammonia gas, which can be toxic levels for humans. And the bats actually, whenever they go into their daily torpor and they breathe slower, carbon dioxide builds up in their lungs, and that buffers the ammonia gas, and it can save them from dying from ammonia gas poisoning, which is pretty amazing. But yeah, I mentioned earlier rabies. People think of bats, they think of rabies, but less than half of 1% of bats contract rabies. Once they get it, they can't pass it on until it's active in their system. And once it's active in their system, they're going to die pretty quickly, just like any other mammal. Once it's active in their system, they tend to get sick, and they'll typically die within a couple of days from being sick. And they don't tend to get, there are exceptions, but they don't tend to get aggressive the way, say, a coyote or a fox might get aggressive if they're rabid. And those mammals are just as susceptible to getting rabies as a bat. Coyotes, foxes, ringtails, skunks. Just the big concern with rabies with bats is because they have easier access to humans. Because as long as a bat can get its head through a hole, then it can get its whole body through. So a hole the size of a pea. When we're doing exclusion tests for bats or for rodents, we do the pencil test. If you can stick a pencil through it, then a rodent or a bat would be capable of getting in. So yeah, you want to make sure you're properly excluding. But typically, no, in my opinion, bats are one of the safest animals out there. They're actually rather clean animals. They groom themselves just as much as cats do. They'll spend an hour grooming themselves before they go to sleep at sunrise. So yeah, there's not too many reports of people getting horribly sick from that.
What's sad is, sorry to interrupt, Dave.
Okay.
Just a quick comment. What's sad is over the last 2 years, a lot of people have associated COVID with bats because of all the stories about people eating bats in China. And bats get a real bad rap, a real bad name, when they're actually one of the most harmless creatures out there.
Yeah, and of course, we still don't know the exact derivative of COVID. Some people believe it could have come from a pangolin. Pangolin is, a unique animal we can find in Asia, and it kind of looks like a. Yeah, you look up pangolin. There's these animals that I always would almost trip on in
Like an
Texas.
anteater crossed with an armadillo.
Yeah, armadillo is the one I was trying to think of. Thank you. Now, a troglodyte, that's an animal that could live its whole life in a cave, but doesn't necessarily have to, such as a cave cricket, a cave salamander. And they might live their entire life cycle within the cave, but they don't necessarily have to. And the troglodyte, those are the ones that live their entire life cycles in the caves and never leave it. Such as you can see, these are white, sometimes they're completely see-through, and they're adapted to the darkness. Many don't even have eye sockets. And hey, Matthew, is it a hard stop at
No, you
3
get plenty
hours?
of time, Dave.
Okay.
If people need to leave, they can log out.
All right.
Take as
Tiny
much
little
time. This is very interesting. I think just, carry on.
that tiny little critter that you can see my finger next to in the picture, that was in the Caverns of Sonora, and that is a troglodytic springtail. The other one below it is a troglodytic silverfish. Some of you are probably familiar with silverfishes. They can be found in your attic papers and whatnot. And so this one you can see lives in a cave, and that was in the Caverns of Sonora too. So no eyeballs to that thing. So a lot of times troglodytes are rather small because nutrition that's available is rather low. But that fish that you see there, that's not one of my photos. That is from a cave in India. And that fish is like a foot long, and it's the largest troglodytic fish in the world. And they were just discovered in 2019. Prior to 2019, the largest troglodytic fish were maybe 1/10 the size of that known to exist. So the huge discoveries are still being made with what lives in caves. And huge discoveries are still being made with just discovering caves, period. Cave records are always changing. As discussed with Matthew earlier, that Lechuguilla Cave is now 150 miles. But when I started working there just 6 years ago, it was less than 130 miles. And the deepest cave in the world just recently changed. It was Krubera Cave for a very long time, but then they discovered Veryovkina Cave. And a very short period of time, they mapped that one to go deeper than Krubera Cave. And off the top of my head, I don't know the exact depth, but roughly, I believe 8,000 feet in vertical depth. Those caves are around the country of Georgia. But then the smallest biospeleology that we're getting down to is microbiology. So, these are microbes that lives in caves. And this is not one of my pictures. These are from research trips in Lechuguilla Cave. And there's many cave microbiologists that study the microbes that live in caves. And some of them are microbes that can actually, dissolve the rock and consume the nutrients from the rock. So Dr. Neelwat Cheeptham, she is a famous Canadian cave microbiologist, and she is studying microbes that live in soils that can be used for medicinal purposes. Dr. Diana Northup, she's a famous cave microbiologist, and she actually discovered a new species of cave cricket in Carlsbad Caverns. That's not microbiology, but Dr. Hazel Barton does a lot of cave microbiology in Lechuguilla Cave, and she has found a microbe in that cave that's resistant to, I believe, over 80% of all known antibiotics. There's been a microbe, an extremophile, they live in extreme environments, that's been found in Lechuguilla Cave that can kill leukemia cells. They found an extremophile in that cave that can kill breast cancer cells. So that's why I was mentioning earlier that these caves are incredibly important for research. And you can see how fragile these environments are. So if they were just open for people to go in willy-nilly, it would quickly destroy those environments. Just being in those caves messes with the environment because you're shedding hair and skin and dust particles all the time. The average person sheds 1 million skin cells per hour. So, just throughout our talk here, I've shed 1 million skin cells around me. And so that accumulates in caves. So in Carlsbad Caverns, it gets like 500,000 visitors a year. We have cleaned 400 pounds of lint out of that cave, just from the visitors that go into it. So a lot of people think, well, why can't I go in that cave? It's not like I'm going to break something on purpose, but just our presence in a cave can be contaminating to it. Some of the neat microbiology that they're finding is things like, these are called snotites, the ones that you see dripping, and those are bacteria that are glooping down from the walls in Mexico, and this is Cueva de Villaluz cave, and that is an active sulfuric acid cave. So I talked about Carlsbad earlier, that was formed by sulfuric acid, and it doesn't have sulfuric acid in it anymore. But now they're finding caves that are actively being dissolved by sulfuric acid. So once they fossilize, once there's not sulfuric acid in them, these things can turn actually into cave formations. And the upper picture there, that's a picture by Dave Brumbaugh. He's a world famous cave photographer. Those are called pool fingers. And it's believed that those are calcified microbial colonies that lived in pools of water. So these are called biospeleothems. Bio being life, speleon being cave, and thems being for the word deposits. So these are cave formations that were formed because of cave life, microbial cave life.
Hey, Dave,
Yeah, Dad.
can I interrupt for a minute?
Yeah, sure.
What slide are you on?
I was on the biospeleothems one.
Okay, I'm not getting, I'm not scrolling through the slides. I'm still on the one with the bats. So
Maybe it's a connection.
it's my first time using Zoom. So
Well, it should
It's probably-
flip whenever I flip. Is everyone else seeing?
Yeah, it looks okay on my end, Dave.
okay, that's good.
We've been seeing this in presenter view, meaning we see like your next slide coming up too, for what it's worth, but I think everything is moving.
Okay. So these are just basic speleothems. You got your stalactites, your stalagmites, and if the two grow together, they form a column. That's what you call them. You call them a column. But key thing about columns, a lot of caves, when you go to them, they'll say this is a column or pillar, but it's actually a different thing. A pillar is bedrock that's left standing after the cave was formed around it. So the rock of a pillar is as old as the bedrock, and that's often hundreds of millions of years old, estimated or believed to be. But the rock of a column can be thousands of years old because they're crystallizing within the caves. Oh, Dad, you're a Dad, you're messing with my slide, Dad. But cave formations are actually made of crystals. If you look at a stalactite under a microscope, you see crystals. But this is a picture that you don't need a microscope to do so. This is in the Caverns of Sonora, and as you can plainly tell, those are crystal formations. And all stalactites and stalagmites and columns and draperies and other speleothems, they're all made out of crystals. So that's usually why you'll find caves called Crystal Cave. In fact, any karst area pretty much has a crystal cave. There's one right down the road from me that's a crystal cave in Yosemite National Park because we got a little vein of marble in it with small caves. So they found one and they named it Crystal Cave. So any cave that has speleothems that grow, they're made of crystals. And so that's why you're not supposed to touch them, because if you touch them, you're going to damage that crystalline structure. You're going to leave oils from your skin behind, and you can stop their growth. There's some halectites. Those grow because crystals growing sideways out of the wall. That's capillary action, water under pressure. So I have seen halectites literally spouting water out like a water fountain after flooding. But they get their name from the root word of helix because they can do spirals and figure eights coming out of the wall. If the capillary is slit, they can make the fishtail helictites that I mentioned earlier. But if it's split, they V out. But in this particular case right here, the capillary is split and slit, so it made the crystal butterfly. This is a really rare formation that's in the Caverns of Sonora, split slit capillary helictite. But speleothems are going to grow wherever they get the chance to crystallize, and no matter what's in their way. And so that formation that you see off to the left there with that dark structure in it, that is a bat that's inside of a stalagmite. And this is actually a lot more common than people realize. Speleothems will grow over top of and around whatever's in their path. There's a lot of old tourist caves that don't operate anymore, and flowstone has grown over top of the hand railings that were installed almost 100 years ago. On average, a good growing formation can grow like the thickness of a sheet of paper per year. So maybe like an inch in a century, but those are just averages. It depends on how quick the water's dripping in. It depends on how acidic the water is, because that dictates how much mineral it can hold. It depends on how clean the air in the cave is, because that's going to control how much the water off gases, releasing carbon dioxide gas. And that's what makes the minerals crystallize in the cave, is actually that off-gassing process of the water becoming less acidic, then it can't hold on to the minerals anymore. So stalagmites can grow right over top of bats, and that's what you're seeing in that one picture. In fact, you can make out the wrist bone right there as the fingers come down from this point for the bat, and there's the tip of the nose and the head of the bat. So that is becoming a fossil. If it's older than 10,000 years, then it is a fossil. So within caves, there's many different types of fossils, because you can get fossils that are in the cave because something was living in the cave, like that bat there, or you get fossils in the bedrock. And like I mentioned earlier, that can help you to get an idea of how old the rock is. That one in the middle there is from Cretaceous limestone. So that was towards the end of the Mesozoic era, when towards the end of the dinosaurs. That one that looks like a little screw there, that's part of a crinoid fossil. And you have a lot of crinoid fossils in a lot of your Maryland rock formations, like from the Ordovician period, from the Permian period. And as you can see here, there's a rich geologic history in Maryland. And right up in the skinny section of Maryland there, around Washington County and Allegheny County, that's where you're going to get most of your karst topography. That's where you have dolomites and limestone. So that's where your caves are. As you can see, lining up with the skinny part of Maryland, up there's another map that's showing approximate locations of caves in Maryland. And there's roughly 150 documented caves amongst those counties in northwest Maryland. And, Washington County has about 60% of all Maryland's caves, at least the karst caves. There's other caves in Maryland, such as Talus Caves and fissure caves, like where the rock has separated. Rocky Gap Cave, I think, is actually a fissure cave. I think I said Talus Cave earlier, but it's a fissure cave that people like to explore. And that's coming over closer to you guys. I think it's in Howard County is where that one is. But there's some really important caves for their history in Maryland, such as Cumberland Bone Cave. I'm only really advertising the ones that are already advertised. Cavers really want to protect caves through secrecy, because once caves become very well known, a lot of people are going to go to them, and then that's often how they get vandalized. If you go to There's many cemeteries in karst areas where the tombstones are made out of stalagmites. People will just harvest speleothems from caves, use them for tombstones or decorations around their house. But Cumberland Bone Cave in Maryland is a significant one for its fossil record from the Pleistocene. During the Ice Age, this was a phenomenal shelter cave. So they found, that's a smilodon that you see right there, a saber-toothed cat. And that complete skeleton in that amazing condition, you may know about it already because it's famous, that is in the Smithsonian Museum in DC. And there was a short-faced bear found in that same cave too. And you can go to the entrance of that cave and, and peek into it. It doesn't go back too far, but it was a perfect shelter cave during the Ice Age. So incredible fossils from the Pleistocene found in Cumberland Bone Cave. And it's right along the Gap Trail, the Allegheny Trail. That's accessible off that. But I'm sure some of you, maybe all of you, have been in the Crystal Grottoes Cavern, a beautiful cave that's not too far from you at all in Boonesboro, Maryland. So it is currently the only show cave in Maryland, to my knowledge. It's certainly the only heavily advertised show cave in Maryland. It's a very decorated cave because it's in the Tomstown Dolomite, and the Tomstown Dolomite is very rich in calcium carbonate. And also it doesn't have a capstone of any sandstone above it. And it's got a calcareous rich soils above the Tomstown Dolomite. So that allows for incredible decorations, as you can see in that picture there. So I encourage you to check out Crystal Grottoes. It wasn't always the only show cave in Maryland. There are other caves that people have owned and would sell tickets to go into. I think they did that in John Friend's cave, but Pennsylvania is right up the road from you guys. There's currently 7 show caves actively running, maybe 8 show caves actively running in Pennsylvania. It was 7 when I lived there, but it used to be at least 17, probably more. It's just a tricky business to operate. Killiansburg Cave, that's another important one for history there in Maryland. This was used during the Battle of Antietam, during the Civil War. Residents from the local town went and hid out in Killiansburg Cave. And so that's one that you can still access today. You have a town that's named for caves. And, it's a small town, but Cave Town is the name of a town there in Maryland. And there's a whole bulletin about the caves of Cave Town. And there was one main cave in Cave Town, and it had different names over the years. It was commonly just called Cave Town Cave, but it's been known as Bushy's Cave. That was a really popular name for it, and many people still call it that. It was called Bishop's Cave. A lot of times cave names change because of landowners, but that one was a well-known one for visiting, and it got damaged pretty bad from quarrying operations to the point that it's not stable. It's not safe to go into. And unfortunately, that's the case that happens to a lot of caves. Dad's told me many stories of caves that he would go in the 80s before I was caving. And those caves, some of them you just can't go in, or some of them don't even exist anymore because of quarrying operations. But I'd love to live in an area called Cave Town, become the mayor of Cave Town. That'd be amazing. But there's been great books and resources published on Maryland caves. One of my favorites is by William Davies. He was actually a former president of the National Speleological Society, of which I am a member of. And he wrote a book called Caves of Maryland. So I encourage you to check out that publication. But if you really want to get into caves, other than show caves, I strongly encourage folks to get a hold of your local grottos. So there's grottos all over the country, and they're localized chapters of the National Speleological Society. And so that's how you can find out about the good caves in the area, as well as safe ways to go. And you can get connected with experienced cavers who would love to take you caving. And there's caves for all different levels of people. You don't have to go rappelling down 200-foot pits. There are literally caves you can drive Jeeps through. There's one in Missouri where they drive a Jeep through it and they pull you on a wagon through it. There's caves with elevators. You can go to Shenandoah Caverns, which isn't too far from you folks. And that one's got an elevator that takes you down into it. There's caves with boats that go through them. And you can just sit back and enjoy the ride. If you want to go crawling through tight squeezes, there's plenty of that out there, but you don't have to be a crawler caver if you don't want to be, because there's caves that have rooms you could fit several football fields inside of them. There's caves that have concerts in them. In Tennessee, there's one called the Caverns, and they literally have concerts in it on a very regular basis. So if you just want to go to a neat concert in a cave, you can find them. So
Dave, we have another question on
Yeah,
the
go ahead.
chat. Are the wild caves mostly back open in the Mid-Atlantic, post White Nose?
so your grottos are going to be your best way to know what caves are open. You have two amazing caves in Maryland that, to my knowledge, are still closed because of White Nose: Crabtree Cave and John Friend's Cave. And I believe that they are the biggest. There's certainly some of the biggest caves in Maryland. I think Crabtree is the biggest. It's almost a mile of passage. And both of those are managed and protected by the Nature Conservancy. And Crabtree Cave is actually the largest hibernacula in Maryland. So the Nature Conservancy, what they're advertising is that those caves are closed due to White Nose. And that very well might be the case. But a lot of organizations I've worked with, they'll have certain things in place for research purposes, where if you're properly decontaminating your gear, then those caves can be accessed for research purposes. So if you're going to be caving, obviously you connect with your grottos and you connect with experienced cavers, but cavers will have White Nose positive gear and White Nose negative gear, and they're not allowed to be stored in the same room, and you have to properly decontaminate those things, and you're supposed to soak your gear in water that's over 100 degrees Fahrenheit for over 20 minutes, and then that kills the spores. Of course, caves that are not used as hibernaculas by bats, those are going to be your safer ones for White Nose. And bats are the primary spreader of White Nose syndrome. They are social creatures. And so the bats go out and meet with other bats, and then the fungal spores spread from bat to bat. And that is the primary way that the fungus is spreading. But there's signs of recovery. There are caves like in New York, Vermont, that used to have thousands of bats, and then they got hit by White Nose syndrome, the fungus that's killing the bats. And within 1 or 2 winters, the colonies were down to, some of them down to single digits, from thousands to like only 9, maybe 10 bats. But some of those colonies are now back up to like 150 bats. And they're finding that the bats that are reproducing are showing some resistance to the fungus. And there's been some studies that have found bats that are not having the fungus growing on them, and they have swabbed the bat, and there was a unique yeast that was on the wings of the bat that seemed like it might be prohibiting the fungus from growing. So bats have been around for an estimated 50 million years. The fossil record of bats goes back pretty far. And so they've lived through a lot, and I think that they're going to pull through White Nose syndrome just fine. So now that we're starting to understand White Nose a bit more, things are not quite as restrictive as they were when White Nose syndrome first hit back in 2006. But talk to your local grottos, and they'll know what caves are open and what caves are not.
We have one other question here. I think you might have addressed this. Are there animals found in caves that are not found outside? You called those what, speleobites? Something like that?
So biospeleology was the term for just all cave life. That encompasses animals that go into caves temporarily and whatnot. But the caves, animals that live their whole lives in a cave, are called a troglobite. And so those are going to be, you're blind, I shouldn't even say blind, because they're eyeless. So they're just adapted to the cave, the darkness of the cave. And there are actually troglobitic creatures in Maryland that there's, according to things that I've read that maybe have been updated since then, but were fairly recent. There's caves like Crabtree Cave and John Friend Cave that have pools of water with troglobitic aquatic creatures that have not even been identified yet. You know, there's plenty, because a cave is like a world within itself, and those troglodytic creatures, that is their world. Their species knows nothing beyond that world. So there's plenty of caves that will have a species of animal that's only known to exist within that particular cave. So yeah, the way you can remember the different categories of biospeleology, I came up with a little fun play on words. You know, a troglodyne are the cave visitors, like a bat. A troglophile might live its whole life in a cave, but doesn't have to, like a cave cricket or a cave salamander. And then the troglobites are the permanent cave dwellers. So the way you can remember that is you can say a troglodyne is sometimes seen, a troglophile will stay a while, and a troglobite will see no light. That's how I always remembered it.
I like it.
Any other questions?
So that would make Dad a troglophile.
Technically, the scientific word for a cave man is a troglodyte. And people sometimes mistakenly use that word for cave critters. But yeah, a historic caveman is a troglodyte, right?
Well, the Greek word for love is philo. It's where we get Philadelphia, city of brotherly love. And so a troglophile would be a cave lover, and
Indeed.
that would be me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Sorry,
where that.
Dave.
No, I appreciate that. Was a great breakdown of the etymology of the word. Thank you. Any other questions from anyone?
Thank you so much, Dave. That was super interesting. Appreciate you coming and sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure. Yeah, if anyone thinks of questions later, feel free to shoot me an email, dave@caves.org. Check out the National Speleological Society, www.caves.org, and I'll be glad to send you cave resources. There's so many neat online resources that you can find. You know, National Geographic even has set up, you know how Google Earth has Street View that you can walk down the street virtually from your computer? There's certain caves that you can do that on. Nat Geo set up one through Song Doom Cave where you can virtually walk through the world's largest cave tunnel in Vietnam. You can aim your phone at the ceiling and see the stalactites. You can hear the dripping water. Yeah, it's really cool. So if you want some virtual cave resources as well as physical cave resources, feel free to reach out about those.